大家晚上好. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Yale Center in Beijing, Yale University's home here in China. I am Carol Lee Rafferty, Yale College class of 2000, and Executive Director for the Center. Tonight, we are so delighted and honored to be hosting this event on the volume Chinese Encounters with America, edited by Deborah Davis and Terry Louds, in collaboration with the Royal Asiatic Society of Beijing. Thanks to Alan and Melinda and your very capable team. For those of you who may not have read this book, this is possibly one of the most important books for U.S.-China relations that came out on Columbia, through Columbia University Press in 2025, profiling 12 men and women, Chinese who have spent time in America where their journeys have changed their lives. There are people in sports, business, science, culture, you name it. And I hope all of you will eventually, if not already, have already dived into this amazing book. What's very special, what makes tonight even more special, is we have one of the editors, Deborah Davis, Professor Emerita of Yale University, as well as an author in the volume, Melinda Liu, as well as the subject of the book, Huang, here with us today. None of them needs an introduction, but I will very quickly do so. Professor Deborah Davis has taught for many decades at Yale, was chair of the sociology department, the Council of East Asian Studies and Women's Faculty Council, and authored many interesting books as well. Huang, she is one of the first media influencers in modern day China. She is the daughter of
John Hunter.
Yes. And the late former foreign minister Huang. Thank you. And Melinda, she opened Newsweek's Beijing bureau in 1980. She has served as a reporter here, but also in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Haiti, Somalia. I might have missed other places. But just three incredible voices with us here today. So a warm welcome to all of them. Before they come up on stage, I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our friends from the American Chamber of Commerce in China, Chairman Jim Zimmerman and President Michael Hart. They have a short but important message for especially the young people, actually young and rising people in the room. Well, thank you.
Fine. Yeah, thank you. Whenever we get the educators, students, and authors and writers together, I think it's an opportunity for us to talk about writing and encouraging our young writers. And this topic, Chinese Encounters with America, fits into an initiative launched by Channel last week, and it's an essay contest tied into the 250th anniversary of the U.S., where U.S. citizens in international schools, local schools, or homeschool can write about their experiences as a U.S. national in China. So this is an initiative that we launched, and the judges are a number of very renowned journalists as well as authors. We've got scholarships that are going to be granted, and for the winners, there's going to be an opportunity to be published as well. So it's open from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12. So we expect the first graders to write the longest and the high schoolers to write the shortest essays. But anyway, it's open to all U.S. citizens in any school or in mainland China. So if you Yeah, you have 3 kids, yeah.
AI rules.
Right. No, I don't. No, anyway, so if anyone is interested or you have friends, colleagues that may be U.S. national in any of the schools, I have some flyers for you. The deadline, of course, is on July 4th.
Oh.
So anyway, but anyway, thank you, Melinda, thank you, Carol, for the opportunity.
I'm going to say a few welcoming, to thank Carol and thank everyone else who made this possible. But we want to give as much time as possible to Q&A, so I'm not going to recognize every member of the staff who made my visit so well. But thank you very much. It's not only a pleasure, but an honor to be here. What I'm going to do first is talk about the book itself and what it was that brought us to do it, make this project. And then I'm going to quickly overview the book so you can see who's in the book. And then I'm going to make a link to Melinda and Huang, who will have a Q&A. And then after that, I'll take questions from the audience. I think Carol has said it quite clearly. This is an unusual book. It's a set of commissioned essays. So we have 12 subjects and we have 12 authors. And I was one of the editors, and it was my suggestion to the other co-editor that produced the book. So it has a origin that's very, very different than anything else I have ever done. And it has been a big surprise to me. Usually in academia, you finish a book and you're already on to the next project. In this case, after the publication, we began to share and have book talks. I think this might be the 25th one. And therefore, it's part of an effort on part of both the editors, but also many of the writers, to help American readers. It's focused to an American reader to better understand the dynamism of China at this moment. So it is very much part of an activist effort to push against the decline, let's say, or the erosion of the good kind of relationships that we were building 10 years ago. And so we see this as a difficult moment, but the people in this book and the people who contributed we want to turn the tide. So now let me say something about the book. You saw the cover. This is a picture of ping pong players coming to Detroit in 1972. And I found it in the archives of the National Committee. And it captures our sense of encounter, that at that moment you have young people emerging from a very different China. The Cultural Revolution is still in process. And in a circuitous way, they end up with an opportunity to go to Detroit before there's official U.S.-China relations. So it captures a moment of tension, but also a moment of opportunity and an outward-facing moment for both, especially for the Chinese students and young professionals who had been cut off from any possibility of visiting. And this was a moment when the doors started to open and people moved forward. We started it in 2022 when COVID was just over, and it was published last year in 2025. And for this kind of book, it was a rapid production. I'm not going to say more about it. We'll do the Q&A. I'll just now, I think, we move through the content and then do a wrap up. So this is the first chapter, and those of you who know Ji Chaozhu, he came to the United States. He's born in 1929, comes to the U.S. for the first time in 1938 as a child. So this is an elite family with underground party connections, and that leadership wants these families to go to the United States and learn, and their identities were not public. Ji Chaozhu grew up not knowing very much about his family's main job, and he went to primary school, middle school, and went to Harvard College. But in 1950, with the Korean War, he's called back, and he becomes one of the translators in the peace negotiations. He ends up in 1987, as the Chinese ambassador to London. This picture is from 1970, when he had been rehabilitated for the second time and was a translator for Huang and Edgar Snow. I do want to say one thing about the authors. There's another thing that's very unusual about this book. We deliberately matched the authors, the writers, and the subjects because they were in the same field. So Chuck Hebert is a historian of diplomatic relations, and he's writing about a diplomat, and also someone he knew. The next chapter is the chapter I did with the other sociologist, Richard Madsen, UCSD, Xie. What I'm going to do now is each time I'll remind you when they were born, when they first went to the United States, and then something about the picture you're going to see. So Xie is born in Quanzhou in 1921. She's our oldest subject. She became the president of Fudan University, where Dick and I have both worked. And Dick actually did meet Xie. I only was able to use the TV and interviews and other types of both digital and print materials to get a sense of her. In this picture, this is 1984, just as she's beginning her position as president at Fudan, and she greets President Reagan. She's known as the mother of the semiconductor. She's a physicist who got her PhD at MIT in 1951. Next person is Zi Zhongyun, who lives in Beijing. The author here is Steve Levine, and he started out as a student of Soviet affairs and then moved into a study of IR and political relations between China and Japan. China and the United States. And he traveled with Zi Zhongyun several times in the United States. So again, this is someone who's somewhat in the same field. She was the head of the Institute of American Studies at Cass, and it was in that context that she and Steve worked closely on many, many projects. This is a picture in 2000. She retired in 1996 and is a widely published author. She's also the translator of the Bridges of Madison County. Yes, an amazing woman. So these first three represent a generation of people born before 1949 who had very elite educations before 1949. If they went to Tsinghua, as Zi Zhongyun did, they were educated in English. In the case of Xie, she went to, it was during the war, so her education is fragmented. But she ends up eventually, she has 1 year in China, and what was then the Memorial University. But she had gone to English schools or English language schools as a child. And obviously, Ji Chaozhu was educated in the United States. So these are elite families, they are urban-based families, they are all members of the party, and they are very, very important at the national level. The next group of people are born in later decades. Many of them are sent-down youth, and they came of age just at the beginning of the opening up in 1980, and they go and take advantage of that. I'll quickly introduce those 5 people. The first is Huang, who many of you may know at Beida. He's just recently retired. He was born in 1948 to a very distinguished academic family. He only went to the United States in 1984. He was a sent-down youth in Inner Mongolia. He was the oldest person in his Beida class in Chibajie. He is pictured here in 2020 on the publication of one of his more recent books. The book that's written about he's written many things, but the essay and book that's discussed in it is one that was published in Singapore, Find 5 Essential Goals in the World of Politics. In this case, Mike Lampton, David Lampton is the author, and those of you who are in the world of China studies or U.S.-China relations will know that Mike is one of the foremost bridge builders in the United States, especially with SAIS, and he worked with Huang for many decades. So again, this is an example where we have someone who knew the subject personally. The next one is a businesswoman, and this is Marjorie Young. And the author here, Bill Kirby, is a close colleague of Margie's over many decades, but also used a case study of her company, her family's company, at the Harvard Business School. And Margie herself is a graduate of the Harvard Business School. So again, this is somebody in the same arena and actually with long personal relations writing about the subject. So Margie is the only one of our 12 subjects not born in China. She was born in Hong Kong in 1950. But her family are deeply rooted in the Jiangnan area. Her grandfather and her father, both of whom studied in the United States, textile engineering, created the biggest silk villageour in China before 1949. And then they moved the company to Hong Kong, where she was born. She is now moved Esquel, as it's called in English, or Ita Jiplan, into one of China's major global brands. They're most famous for their high-quality shirts, where they produce at one point 80% of luxury men's shirts, and it's diversified. And this chapter takes it right through the sanctions issue with the Americans last year. So this picture was taken in 2024, and 3 days ago I was having a meal with Margie here in Beijing. So this is also someone with whom it's a book about the past, but we're moving forward and we're in the current time. The next person is not as well known, I think, to many people, even in China, Zhang Ye. She is a major leader in the NGO world, the international NGO world. And the person who wrote her chapter, Elizabeth Knupp, just finished after 10 years at the head of the Ford Foundation. So again, it's matching someone who is really working in the field about which they're writing. Zhang Ye is born in 1954. This group that you're seeing now, the children born under the red flag in the early 1950s. Like Wang Jise, she's a sent-down youth. And to our surprise, we hadn't realized this, like Wang Jise, she was a sent-down youth in Inner Mongolia. So there was one of these interesting serendipities, which we appreciated. I say it made us feel like we had made some good decisions in the matches. Zhang Ye's first trip was at age 30. She goes to Smith College on a short term, and it changes her life. So she's not only moves from being in the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and CAS, but she also moves into the private sector and becomes a core staff member at Ford, at Asia Foundation, and then the China Medical Board. So she's in this NGO, international NGO world, but coming from the Chinese side, and she's an extraordinary person. In this picture, this is 2008, where she's in Xiamen, where she worked with Microsoft in their CSR project. So again, a very important innovator who is not a high-profile person, but is definitely someone who changed the trajectory of one sector in China in a very fundamental way. The next person doesn't need any introduction. She is the only person in our book everybody knows. And so why did we choose her? People, when we told them about the project, they said, oh, we'll do Yao Ming. I said, no, there's already books about Yao Ming. Lang Ping, of course, has a profile in China comparable in many ways, but it's because of her extraordinary career where she coaches both the US team and the Chinese team. And so for our encounters with America, she is particularly exciting, I think, subject to think through some of the issues. And again, I want to flag the connection of the author. Susan Brownell is an anthropologist. Her first book is called Training the Body for China, I think is the exact title. But Susan herself is an athlete. So when she was a student here in the 1980s, she competed for her Chinese university in track and field. and she is now a nationally ranked senior ice skater. So she's also done Olympic color commentary. So I was very eager to have Susan as an athlete write about lumping. She could not interview lumping, so she relied on a lot of documentary, obviously film, there's a huge record, but she had some very good sources, and she was able to sort of get one degree of separation. So I think that this is a distinctive profile of lumping, and it was very, I think, from the way she may have been portrayed to you throughout the existing media coverage. Lumping is a little bit younger than the first three born in the early 50s. However, because as a young athlete recruited by the state, at 18, she was already being prepared for the national team. So she's, in terms of when the occupation emerges as a way for someone to use their encounters with the United States to move not only their field, not only themselves, but their field in a new direction. I think she's particularly exciting. Then we're going to go back in time, and this is the one person who doesn't fit. Does anybody in the world, in this room, know Yang Meiqi? Nobody. Okay. So Yang Meiqi is born in 1945, and her family are urban Shanghai people at that point. They were in Chongqing. At age 9, she comes to Beijing and is at the Central Dance Academy. And so she has 9 years of training, and she graduates at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. So she's sent down as a dancer to Guangdong province. She's not Cantonese, but that becomes her home base. Her first trip to America in the US is 1986, when she's 41 years old, doesn't speak a word of English, and it's a very tight budget. And the only flight that they could afford to send her on required, I think, 6 changes of plane. Right. And she arrived, she had little cards to help her. When she got to New York, Ai Weiwei and I think Chen Gaige were both there and became helpful in leading her around New York. She then worked with ADF, the American Dance Foundation, and they were her hosts. So this is a picture taken in 1988. So this is 2 years after she's made this initial trip, and you can see it's Chinese dancers surrounding Reinhardt, the director, and in the bottom you can see Jin Xing. Yes. So this is a story of someone who was trained in a Soviet-style academy in the 1950s as a child. Cultural Revolution, and then she becomes, some people call the mother of modern dance. So Guangdong Modern Dance is the first modern dance company. As those of you who've been in China know, that this is actually a very revolutionary thing to have done modern dance. And she is an extraordinary woman and a very gifted dancer. And the person who wrote this is also a very gifted dancer. So Emily Wilcox went to Harvard and studied Chinese, but she also was a dancer at a very professional level. And her Fulbright was the National Dance College here, university. And Emily's first book is about dance in China. But Emily's recent work and in this chapter, dance is an area where the diaspora has been, meaning diaspora is important everywhere, but in this chapter, you'll see how Chinese Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Southeast Asian, Filipino connections through modern dance opened up this community, which continues today as immensely inventive and vibrant. So that is the end of group 2. Now group 3 is actually divided into 2 groups. This is my colleague, former colleague, Huang, and the chapter is written by one of my former students who started out as a scientist, took a sociology course, and decided to write about China and society. So Abby teaches now at Vassar. When she was a Yale undergraduate, Deng Xinguang and I were creating the Yale Beida program. And through that, Abby was in Deng's lab, and her thesis is about working with him as he's developed as a biotech entrepreneur as well as a scientist. So let me say something about Deng himself. Again, amazing person. He was born in 1962. So we now are in this next group in a small, really small village in Hunan. And his teachers were sent down youth. And he talks about that. It was a long trip to the primary school, and his initial teachers were sent down youth. He then, however, through his extraordinary diligence and through a county level key point school, is in the class of 78 at Beida. And here's our second unexpected. Huang Jise was the oldest student in the class of Qibajie, and Deng Xinguang was the youngest. And it was just by chance, of course, because the way we chose them had nothing to do with Beida. It had nothing to do with the class of 78. But again, it just like finding the two who had been sent down to Inner Mongolia, it created a kind of synergy among our subjects, which nobody imagined when it was first done. So Deng Xinguang was born in this small village in Hunan. He goes to Beida. He gets his BA, he gets his MA, goes to UC Berkeley, PhD, and he comes to Yale. And it was at Yale. I worked with him for 10 years. And we created together the program, which no longer exists, between Yale and Beida. And then we also, I encourage certain students to work in his lab, and in the case of Abby, she worked in his lab at New Haven, and she worked in his lab in Beijing. So this is a picture of quite recent, 2022. Deng Xinguang resigned from Yale, came back to China full-time in 2014, and he's now created this extraordinary institute for the advanced agricultural science in Shandong. So this is a picture of him in his genetically modified rice experimental areas. He's focused particularly on genetic engineering of rice. So the other person is in the room. The other person born in the early 60s is Huang, whom you soon will have a chance to have a conversation with. But she has, of course, a very different experience. She comes to the United States also as a child, like Ji Chaozhu. And this is a picture of her in one of her many roles, which she'll talk. She's an influencer now, but she's also a major journalist in the area of fashion, and she will be interviewed today, but she also, the chapter is written by Melinda, whom you know. So this is a picture in 2007. So Deng and Hong are those people born 61, 62, who then come of age just as China's changing and go in directions that no one could have expected when they were teenagers. The final two, on the other hand, are born after 1980. And so they've grown up in an era of China in which young people could imagine all kinds of futures. And started English very early, had cartoons from not Japan, the United States. Some of them even traveled to the United States as children to go to camp, or their parents took them on trips. I mean, as an encounter with America unlike anything the earlier generation. So I want to we just chose two, a musician and a journalist. So the first is the journalist who worked with Isabel Hitten in China Dialogue. Ma Tianjie also went to Beida and he discovered many things: vegetarianism, environmental activism. And this is a picture of him in 2016 being interviewed on CCTV, the CGTV, the global channel. He was going to be here today, but he's in New York. So I will see him next week in New York. And he first went to the United States in 2007. And it was for a short, he just did a master's in American University, and then he returned. And then the last returned person after studying in the United States is a musician. And I should have said Lily Pike, who wrote the Ma's chapter, is also a young journalist who focuses on environmental activism. This is our last chapter. How many people have heard Gong's music? Some of you have heard of him. When I was in Chengdu in June, he was just having his premiere of his most recent symphony, and I was leaving the next day, so I didn't get to hear it. So Huang, as he refers to himself, is born in 1992. So he's the youngest, and he's in extreme situation, a way of the world is open, where am I going to go? Nevertheless, actually the world came to him, and it was through Yo-Yo Ma identifying him as a prodigy, which he was, in 2001 at age 9, which is also Ji Chao Ju. So there's a circular thing here that these young men, young boys at age 9, enter the United States as students, both of them in New York, and relatively high-pressured situations. So Pong goes to Juilliard Prep, then he goes to Juilliard, and while he's at Juilliard, he decides he is not going to be a pianist. This was what everyone thought he would do, but he was going to be a composer. And he felt that the kind of music he wanted to compose could only be done in China. So he, like Deng Xinguang, returned when the career in a way was established, but he saw the opportunities in China. And this conversations we've had before gathering here with one-on-one, this is one of the most exciting things for someone of my career, that the way in which China is a place of global opportunity. And nobody is saying it's smooth riding. We don't know certainly where it's going to go next, but it's that dynamism. And we'd like to end the book with this young musician who represents, I think, that openness, that creativity, that sense of opportunity, and the way he is building that career here in the United States, in China, but still with the opportunity, in this case, we're focused on the US, to go back and forth, the connections that he's made. And here I'll just flag the themes at the beginning. How do we describe this? Terry Lautz, the other co-editor, calls it the gravitational slingshot. This was a term that somehow entered his mind while we were talking about the book. And a gravitational slingshot is you pick up the movement around and then you accelerate yourself. The theme that I wanted, and I also carry through, is peers. What we see now among all these younger people, but even if we see how the older generation matured, is there are peers. For Americans now, when we are working in China and when we are working with our occupational partners, it's as peers. And this is a huge, huge difference than when I first came to China in 1978. I could be a sociologist, but I didn't have peers. I had wonderful hosts, and it continued through the 80s, people making things possible for me to do American-style research, but I didn't have peers. And now our world is, I think, replete with peers. Now, quickly to close and bring you to the next event, this is the book that started Encounters. This is Terry Lautz's book, Americans in China, which also profiles 12 people over a time period, starting with Walter Judd, who was an anti-communist doctor, but was a doctor in China and deeply rooted in China. And then the last person in this book is Melinda Liu. So I'm going to quickly make the transition. This is the YouTube, and if those of you who haven't, I think it's absolutely wonderful. And it's stories of the opening of China, and I'll now hand over the podium to Melinda.
Carol, thank you very much, and thanks for that amazingly generous introduction. I am probably the least known person in this room, but I hope I will help you get to know the real stars, including Huang. And since we've been introduced already, I'm just going to jump right in. So Huang, some of the profile subjects in the book that Deb co-edited, when they were approached and asked, can we write about you and will you be featured in this book? They were saying, oh, no, don't write about me. There's nothing to write about me. And even though I was the one asking you if I could write about you. I never asked you before. How did you feel about that? Did you feel like you would like not want it? You know, we were kind of being. Did you want to be modest, or did you say, "Oh, okay"?
I think my American experience probably wiped out some of that good old Chinese modesty that I should have. So when you approached me, and also it wiped out some of that good old Chinese caution, like, oh, you know, a book. What is she going to write? I don't think I edited your writing in any way, actually, because you didn't show me until before it was supposed to go to print. So she didn't give me a chance to either. So I think for me, it was the fact that it's just not in my nature to actually say, oh my God, I'm not worth it. In fact, I think even if I came from a particularly ordinary family, I think part of the American education that I had, that I kind of love so much, is a sense of equality. And it's a sense, the fact that ordinary stories are actually the most important stories, rather than, you know, stories about certain famous people. That everybody's story is important. So I think that was part of the education I had and the influence I had. Yes, the lack of modesty is also a problem. Lack of caution is another problem, but I think for those of you who know me in this room, I'm known for having a big mouth. I don't know whether that has anything to do with my American education. I think I can probably chuck it to America for that also. So I think, you know, I think for me it's straightforward and all that. So when you asked me, I just thought, oh, fun. Because I do remember having a lot of fun talking to you. Because actually it was because you proposed to write this chapter that I started my podcast, which is an autobiography, which actually is now pretty popular.
Like millions.
So yes, thank you for inspiring me to do that podcast, because I know I'm too lazy to write one. So I thought, well, Melinda is writing one anyway, right? So I'm not going to write one. And so when they proposed me to do a podcast, I thought, well, I could just podcast my personal history. So
This is the first time I realized there was a linkage there.
yeah, exactly. So there's a key one.
All right, so I'll get a commission from.
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about that later. Very American of you. Or very Chinese, I don't know which.
So, a lot of the, you know, a lot of the profile subjects would say, oh, you know, there's nothing to write about. But in fact, they are all special, and you are special because you had this American experience. So, at what point did you realize yourself that there was something special about going to America, living with an American family, going to school when you were like 12? Was it from the very beginning, or did it only kind of dawn on you later? Or did you not think it at all?
I think the fact that I went at such an early age, and also I went at such a strange time, because I literally went to America in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. And it just made the whole thing, you know, you're just weird, right? So I think there were, in the program, I think Ji Chaozhu, the first person in your book, Deborah, he was the one who inspired the Chinese government. Him and Nancy Tong were the two translators who inspired the Chinese government to design a program of sending young kids over to foreign countries, Western countries, because at the time there was a rapprochement between China and the US, and they realized the best translators are not those who are masters of language, but those who actually understands Western culture. And that has something to do with growing up in the West, understanding the culture and being able to translate in context rather than out of context, which can produce many hilarious situations, but not necessarily very good for rapprochement per se. So I think that was so from the beginning when you are chosen or decided, like you got on the plane, you know that you were special because there were only 27 kids out of all of China in 1971 that went on that journey. The feeling is very different. I mean, the 20, maybe 10 to 15 of us actually later on got together. On the one hand, there are people who felt, because eventually that program fell apart. The foreign ministry never decided to do anything with these 27 kids that they sent abroad. They came, they went to university, and at the time, the foreign ministry, I don't know why, but basically there were no continuation to say, listen, we spent the money, we educated these 27 kids. There were 5 kids in Japan, 5 in the US, 2 in London, 5 in France, 5 in Mexico for Spanish, and 2 went to Egypt. Yes, for Arabic. And 2 went to Germany for German. So it was quite a broad program. But somehow when the kids came back, the ministry didn't follow up. It's sort of like maybe that generation of leaders just died and this program was, you know how it goes. You know, in China, it's like change on top and then you are just, yeah. So I think a lot of us, or some of us, quite a number of us of the 27 felt that we were guinea pigs, that nobody ever did anything with these. They just experimented with these guinea pigs and nobody ever really followed through with what actually they wanted with these guinea pigs. So that was part of the feeling. And then for me, because I lived with a Jewish family in New York, I came back, actually I was just talking to my friend Didi about it. I came back feeling terribly guilty. Because I thought, it was a cultural revolution. Everybody was suffering. And I got to go to New York. And I got to go eat ice cream and live with a nice middle-class family where we took vacations in New Jersey, and I just felt terribly guilty. I really did. It took some while being back in China to realize it wasn't really that necessary.
And if I'm not mistaken, I recall that on that very first journey, you actually traveled you didn't have any parents with you. You were on your own, and I guess one of your traveling companions was the cook to the UN mission in China.
When we were sent abroad, I think the French kids, the kids that were sent to Paris went first, and then we followed them. We were the second group that were sent on the plane. And before that, I'd been on the plane maybe once or twice, and all the rest of the kids, they've never been on a plane. So when we got on, and at the time, you couldn't fly directly, of course, in 1970. So you have to fly from Beijing to Paris, and then from Paris to New York. So we were terribly happy that we were going to see the kids in Paris. So that was our biggest sort of, we're going to see them and have fun. So when we got on the plane, our first shock was when our travel companion, they had sent two adults. I don't know what they were thinking, but the kids had minor ability in speaking a foreign language, in speaking English. The adults have no capability whatsoever in speaking English. So they had a driver and a cook who were going to the Chinese mission in the UN. So they were supposed to be the supervisor for the 5 kids. So, and they've never been on the plane, and they've never been abroad, right? So we get on the plane, and they were serving dinner or lunch. And then Air France, of course, first of all, when we saw the Air France stewardess, we all thought they are the most beautiful women we've ever seen in our lives. It was like, oh my God, they're so beautiful. You know, they have all their coiffed hair and their stewardess uniforms and everything. So we were already, our jaws were like, oh my. And then they came with the little trays for us for the meal on the plane. And then we thought those were the most beautiful toys we've ever seen. Because when we were little, in China, you have to, one of the things you do is 过娃娃家, it's play dollhouse, right? So you have little dishes and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, everybody had little dishes. It was like, oh my God, this is like a game. This is great. And then we asked the adults, we said, can we keep this? So the adults, it was their first time. So of course they, yes, you can keep everything except the tray, the big tray. The small ones you can't. So I'm sure the beautiful French stewardess were completely confused when they came back to collect the tray and realized the Chinese not only ate the food, but every single little dish that's on the tray. So there was nothing. We just dumped everything, into our bag.
And the admiration of the French stewardesses was that your first inspiration about fashion?
It was.
About the shoes.
Yes. So then we arrived in New York, and we were driving from JFK into the city when at the time, China just had one little airport road, and it's the only road where you see cars actually passing each other. Normally in China, when I was little, our game, when I was 10, is to go into the street and see how many little sedans you can count in a day. And if you can count more than 8, it's a big day. So we would sit in front of the 灯市口, and I was like, oh, there's a 小汽车. And so we would get really excited. So we would actually try every day to do this so that we can get the number up to 10 in a day. And it was very hard. So when you go on the airport road, when cars were passing each other like that, it was a big moment, because that's a lot of cars. You have to pass each other. And in New York, all the way driving from JFK into the city, I still thought we were at the airport because there were so many cars passing each other. So I thought, my God, this airport is so big. And when we finally got off the highway, and there was a shoe store, and I have to say, that picture of that shoe store is still in my mind. There were red shoes, there were blue shoes, like sky blue shoes, and green shoes. And I was like, Americans are very strange. Why would they have a shoe store at the airport? Because I didn't realize I was already out of JFK. So, that was my first impression. But that was 1971. Yeah.
She was 12 years old.
No, 1973. Sorry. I'm getting my own biography. 1973.
12 years old.
Yeah.
I want to be sure to give the audience a chance to ask questions, so I'm gonna give you a question that I hope you can give a heartfelt answer because I know you've thought about this a little bit. You mentioned that had you not been to the States, had you not lived with a Jewish American family, had you not been educated there, that possibly your personality might have been different. Had you not been bilingual, you may not have had some of the advantages that this bilingualism gave you, especially at that time when it was rare. And you mentioned that you might have been more competitive because not being bilingual, not being bicultural, you might not have had the doors opening for you that you had. What do you think about that?
I think there are two things. So by the time I came back to China after Vassar, I was working for foreign companies. I was working for a German company in China. The thing with me is that I never knew how much people suffered during Cultural Revolution, and also because I'm from a privileged family and I'm from a big city, I never knew what it meant to be deprived of material goods, and sometimes to even not have enough clothes, not have enough things to eat, not to have meat on the table or in your diet. So I didn't go through that suffering. So when I interviewed for Goldman to be a trader, I was rightly rejected by a young trader who said, this woman is not hungry enough. So I think for me, what I mean by American influence is precisely because of this experience that I actually, just by fate or by the design of my mother, missed the entire experience in China where everybody else was struggling. So therefore, I never professed it or never felt the hunger that one had felt. So I think, I applied for that job. I really wanted that job, but I was just rejected because I wasn't hungry enough. And I think that's what I meant by what I said to you. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And yet, even with the advantage of your family and your bilingualism, biculturalism, you have sometimes paid a price for being perceived to be Americanized. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that is more the fact that I'm not in tune. I'll give you another story. I have friends who were big real estate tycoons in this town. Okay, look outside. Some of them have their logos that you might see. So they invited. I was running a tiny little struggling magazine called I Look, which you saw in the picture that Deborah showed you in the background. So I was glorified as the publisher of the magazine, but the publisher actually is just a glorified title for a salesperson, right? Advertising sales. So anyway, my friends in the real estate thought, well, if you're doing sales, maybe you can give a lecture to my salespeople about how to sell real estate in China. So I thought, again, why not? And I go and I start doing my own, to use a New York spiel, about how to do, what's the correct way to do sales. You got to talk about your product. You got to make sure your client recognize the value, that they don't just buy it because. So then in the room, everybody raised their hand, and I knew I was doing something wrong because mostly when Chinese think you're okay, they don't raise their hand. It's only when Chinese think you're really wrong that they raise their hand. And so I called on one of the salespeople who were listening to me and said to me, he goes, I don't agree with you. The only time that my client recognized my value is if I go to their house at 7 o'clock in the morning, take their children to school for them, if it rains, I have to give them my umbrella so they don't get wet and I get wet. And also, it's also when my client, even when they live like halfway around the city, tell me that when I go to see them, I have to take him like 2 cups of coffee and things like that. I'm like, no, but that's not your product value. You are enslaving yourself to your clients, and that's not the right way to do sales. That's like very American. So meanwhile, everybody in that conference said, yes, me too. And everybody protested to everything I was saying. And then I realized that my friend, the tycoon, actually had a sales system. It's called 末尾淘汰制. Everybody in China knows that he actually fires the 3 salespeople who has the lowest sales record for that month. And so that's why they go crazy to try to book sales. And I was horrified. And this is one instance. I also know some guy who, another tycoon who is in the movie business, and he also is in the agency business representing stars. So actually, so he said, oh, he said to me, he said, you can do an agency business, because you can manage these people. I'm like, oh, so you want me, because I knew at the time when I was in New York, the people say in Hollywood, those agencies are called Mr. 10%, because by law, they pay 10% of the cut. So I said, oh, you want me to be Miss 10%? And he looked at me, he says, what do you mean? So I just explained to him, he says, no, here we take 60%. So I thought, oh my God. So of course I didn't take the job or whatever, but there are just certain things that you thought was the norm when you study, live in a foreign country at my age at the time, because I was there in the 80s. So by the time I come back, China was roaring ahead economically, and everybody was doing everything to accumulate capital. And there were no rules. But I came from a place where, there were laws regarding how much an agency can get from a talent. And for me, it was like, oh, okay, this is the jungle here. I didn't realize it was jungle. I just knew I didn't feel comfortable.
Thanks so much. I think that's a really insightful way to look at the cultural divide. Yes. Why don't we open up to some questions? Could you please tell us your name and your institution, if you have one, and who you want to pose your question to?
Sure. My name is Henry Lee. As Ms. Huang, you said you reject the offer from Goldman to be a trader. Actually, I am a trader.
They rejected me.
Because you're not.
Congratulations. Yes.
And I just want to echo that when Mr. Professor Deborah mentioned many times about beta, I want to, I'm not sure whether it is suitable for ask for your memories about your father, Mr. Huang. Actually, Mr. Huang is the professor of the Beida School of Economics, actually, where I studied. Actually, he is the teacher of my teachers, and he is very respected by our teachers. And I just want to ask the questions: what is your memories, and what do you think of him as professors? And if you're not wanted to share too much about your personal life, the options. I searched your father. He also went to US in 1980s. At the age of 48, maybe he's also qualified for to be a character in Mr. Deborah's book. Do you think that his Western education, his Western culture will be influenced you? Thank you very much.
My dad was a wonderful dad. He liked to play with children. He loved life. He had a zest for life that was amazing. I mean, of all people, I think he's the only one I know who had a love affair in the labor camp. Right? If that doesn't prove to you the guy loves life, I don't know what else. Right? So as my mom used to say, the fact that I've had so many husbands, it's all the fault of my dad. So that's my dad. That's my impression and memories of my dad. But my dad spoke broken English. He was not, he could read and write English very well, but his spoken English was very Shanghainese. You know, he opens his mouth and you know it's a Shanghai. He was a very young, he grew up 1940s in Shanghai, so in a banker family. So he was kind of a young dandy type of guy, kind of cool. My dad was very good looking. And so he had a car, he had a Ford car, and so he cruised in Shanghai a bit and was good with the ladies. So my dad didn't have, but I think what I inherit from him is a sense of humor and also kind of a love for life. And I'll tell you one funny story about his English. So when he was in the labor camp, but he got very suntan, right? So he was a dark complexion Chinese to begin with. 有点黑. He would come back from the labor camp really, really dark. And he really wants Shanghai food, which is seafood based. And there was no seafood to be found in Beijing in normal markets. So he would pedal around the streets and he discovered the special store that would only sell to diplomats and foreigners. Kind of like the friendship store, but not the friendship store. It was a special place. So although he was already in the labor camp, he would go into that store and speak his awful Shanghainese English and pretend he's from Africa. And buy the fish, the shrimp, the crab, and everything. He would come home with the loot and say, hey, I made it today because I was African. Oh my God.
I think Joan has a question. Oh, right there too.
My name's Stevie Nickerson. I'm a film producer. I hope it's okay if I ask this. She's my best friend. So she was sharing a story with me the other night. And when we finished speaking, I was just like, oh my God. And I've known Huang for 30-something years. And it was about when you came back from the US, when you were in high school. You were abruptly pulled out of school. I had thought you were I thought she was in the US all through high school and college. I didn't realize she was back here for a few years in between. And you come back to a situation where your parents are not at home. And I was just thinking about like the tenacity and the courage that you had to handle that situation and take the ball forward. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing it after coming out of like ice cream and high school in New York and having a good time. Like what, and that must have just been kind of traumatic.
Yes. So anyway, by the time I came back to China in 1977, my mother was under house arrest. My stepfather was under house arrest. My mother was locked up in the foreign ministry at some third floor broom closet or something like that, because that's the way political struggles and movements go. You go up and then you come down, and when you're up, everything is just really good, and when you come down, it's very, very shitty. So anyways, so I came back from New York, and I think what Didi wants me to tell is when we were talking the other night, and she was asking me how I got through that period. And I thought, you know, in hindsight, it was really that American naivete and righteousness, which sometimes I hate so much these days, right? But it was the thing that carried me through, because They were really nasty to me. They made me sleep in the car garage. It was January, there was no heat. And I thought, you know what? Guys who abuse kids and bully kids are bad people. And Superman will deal with people like that. Okay, I was 16. I didn't really believe in Superman. But if you watch enough of Superman and Batman, you believe there is something righteous. Because I wasn't brought up religious. So I couldn't pray to God or anything like that. But I think at the time, it was that naivete and that superhero complex and all that was so prevalent in popular culture in America that kind of carried me through, right? And I was a little bit oblivious to the misery. I was more angry at the injustice than I was. So I wasn't self-indulging in this victimizing, oh my God, what am I going to do? You know, my bond is no longer powerful. So there wasn't any of that. So I remember just thinking what Wonder Woman would do, right? Something like that.
Great. Yeah. Joe?
Well, I really loved the book. I just want to say it's just fantastic. I know many of the people and many of the authors because I myself am someone who was here from the early 80s on and spent a lot of time since the Reform and opening up. And first of all, you may not be religious, but you acquired Jewish guilt. I love that. I just love that. That's really funny, but I just, my close colleague John Yeh, who one of the chapters is about, I worked at the Ford Foundation and I know her very well. We were together shortly after the book came out and we were talking with many of our other colleagues about how important these personal memoirs are, especially before some people exit the scene. So my question really is, meaning like they die, right? And because some people who had really unbelievable experience and exposure on both sides, I love Terry's book, the first book, right? They're really have these amazing stories to tell, like yours, right? So I'm just wondering, will there be any sequel or continuing effort, a documentary series, a series of interviews? Because there are, for the fabulous people that you chose and the stories that you told, there are so many others that really capture, I think, the richness of the last 40, 50 years of the Reform and opening up period, or even before, and what's happened since. And because the moment, in a sense, is also passing, it's hard to know what's going to happen going forward. But certainly this level of exchange and exposure of two cultures is not easy these days and is not getting easier. So, it's really, I think I'm recommending there be a follow-up initiative and wondered if you and Carrie have talked about it or anybody else and what the plans are. So
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to my rambling comments.
Thank you for the kind words. As I said, this wasn't a book we planned to write, and it's been a joy. And now taking it on the road has been really special. The first question is about translation and then an audio book. The video piece has come up with just the people who are here. So I'm turning over some ideas on how I want to take the next step. And again, one of the crucial issues is readership, that this book was designed for an American general readership. But what we've discovered in this first year is that the most enthusiastic readers are from within China, or they are children or grandchildren of people from China. So I'm turning it over in my head, and I do have a small project that will extend it. But as there's so many stories to tell, but I think we are happier that we're more satisfied that we did it. And it wasn't a hard pitch, but it was a hard pitch to an academic press. And then the week before I left, it was in the full page ad and the New York Review of Books. And that is the first signal we've gotten that maybe it's more than just our personal quest. But I welcome suggestions from anybody and everyone in the audience about what could be a possible next step, if not for us, for others. But thank you for your kind words.
This side, yeah, maybe one from this side here in the front row.
Hello, my name is Jim Beck from Schwarzman College at Chicago University. A lot of the figures profiled in this book are people who are very much established in their fields. I'm wondering for maybe the next 20, 30 years, when the US-China relationship, or however it may be, how do you think will be the profile of people who might be, let's say, if you were to write this book 30 years later, 20 years later, and with the leaders of China in that particular time? Do you think they will also have a lot of experience in coming to America? Or do you think they'll be more likely to have been brought up and stayed and educated in China?
This occupational niche is a key organizing principle for this book. For example, when I gave the talk at Tsinghua the other day, I got the first really angry criticism from a non-Chinese that we had failed to celebrate Chinese leaders. And this person in particular wanted Xiaomi Lei Jin. And I said, well, Lei Jin has lots of opportunities. I don't think that this is a book that needs to give a platform to that. And we did have two entrepreneurs here in the book. What I would emphasize is that America is this big elephant in every room, in a way, even when it's not there. And I think for an American writing a book and thinking about it, this is self-reflection. What does America mean? And what we tried to do with these 12 was to show it, and Huang was just talking about ideas and feelings and ways of living that you thought you nurtured in America and brought to China. That's what we're illustrating with these 12. And I would, as a teacher, in fact, going further, that's why I emphasized when I did the summary, the year in which they came. Because the other piece of this behind our thinking is the conditions in America change. So the America or the US that one encounters is not only defined in part by your occupational niche. The dancer who didn't speak any English, it was all about dance. She really didn't get anything else, and yet it went very far. So we emphasize the occupational, but what we don't do in the book, but we did in our thinking, was thinking about what was going on in the United States. So right now, things are going, so the anti-immigrant, the racist, whatever is the issue that seems to be surfacing and shaping the encounter is something I personally am interested in encountering. It's maybe that's not the answer you wanted, but I'm not going to predict where it's going to be in 10 years or 20 or 30 years, but I want to identify the underlying assumptions and the processes that engaged us in writing this, and that can go forward. And then we'd ask the question again. I thought what you were going to say, which is the other part that people have said, these are, all elite urban people. What does it say about China? It isn't a book that's going to say something about China in large. It's talking about a very specific thing about encounters of these people. And if one goes deeply in thinking about these biographies, you can take the story in many, many different directions.
Can I just say something? If you look at China now, and if you send the same people to America, it will not have the same impact as the 12 people in this book. Simply because China is so much more sophisticated. A lot of the sort of awesome experience we had in terms of revelation would never happen to my daughter's generation, for example. She would never find it awesome to have a shoe store with red shoes in New York City, right? So I think Chinese now going to America, first of all, they're much more goal-oriented. They know what they want. They want a degree. They want maybe to stay in America. They want certain things. So they're much more clear-minded. We were, I think, in some ways, for me, I was 12. So I was a little bit stupid and silly and young. I was a child. But I think even for the older people in the book, when they went to America, it was with this expectation of awesomeness, that respect, and the fact that to these generations of Chinese, America was the shining beacon on the hill. But I think for the next generations, it's just not going to be the same.
I could keep talking on this conversation. We haven't had it, but it's people coming to the United States now are rightfully, critical of what they see in the United States. So there is a new, it's not, you mentioned the awesome, the materiality of an earlier generation. And to me, that's that's because what I do. I'm interested when people come from other countries, but I especially host people or work with people from China. So what's wrong with America? And so China is giving advice. And so Chinese who encounter America on their trip in America, it's what are these lousy trains and this horrible infrastructure? And boy, so there's and I don't know exactly when that begins, but I would say it was definitely pre-COVID. So this is another dynamic that Chinese are coming with a sense of we've solved something. And this then leads to a very interesting, different encounter with America. And the one thing I would say, Huang, what I was thinking about when I'm talking about further now, the new thing for me is America is a respite from China. And this successful, high stress, and doesn't mean you're highly paid. One person I'm thinking about is a high school teacher in a level 2 city, and as the principal of the school. And this is a really stressful job, but this person doesn't have to be wealthy. They're a way to come to the United States. In this case, it was in New York, and it's a respite. And what she said to me, this was at a meal about 3 weeks ago, is I'm here to pause. I'm here to think about what's important before I go back to China. So America is a respite. And I'm turning this over. I don't know how many people experience that, but it's a sign of the times when people from China can afford to take a break from their life in China and have this respite. And this is the follow-on, this is the conversation, my first day in China, the other person at the table said, so after I got here, she said, how is that possible? A middle school teacher going to America is very expensive. It isn't expensive, and it's not an expensive place to visit in this kind of extended way. So there's a whole other format for the encounter at the moment, and I think that has implications for the person who's coming from China, but also for the person who's receiving them in the U.S. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Yu. I'm a business owner, but I was a graduate ambassador in 2021. And on the topic of serendipity encounters, I was actually a student of Abigail Coughlin, who authored the chapter on Huang.
This is our world.
Yeah.
There are 10,000 people in the world, and we know them all.
And so basically, you're my grand professor.
That's
what a true.
So what he said was Abby is his professor and vassar. Yeah.
And I remember, when I first met her, she opened her mouth, and it was just like this Beijing accent of Chinese came out. I was totally shocked. I find out where she was trained in Beijing was actually very close to my middle school too. So, but anyway, on the topic of serendipity and encounters, I felt like the book is comprised of more than just coincidences. I felt like you orchestrated this ensemble of works corresponding, the corresponding authors share the background of the historical character that they're
subject. Yeah.
Yeah, so my first question for you, Professor Davis, is how did you orchestrate this whole thing? Like, this is a symphony. And how did you choose the authors? How did you, make sure that they submit their manuscript by time, on time? And, so that's my first question. My second question something that you said in your speech. You said, someone said, write a book on Yao Ming, and there's already plenty written on him, but there isn't plenty written on Lang Ping and all the other female historic figures who go unnoticed and undocumented. And I felt like, it's not a coincidence that the majority of the figures in this book are actually females, because we are also phenomenal females in your respective fields. So my question is, how we live in a very different time where females can choose not to marry and sustain a career and do whatever they want. But what are some lessons and takeaways that you've learned from writing about these characters? And what are some advice you give to young women these days?
There are too many questions. I must we can talk after, but I do, everyone does ask the first question. I do want for Terry and for the book to say it. So I went to his book talk, Americans in China, and I said, this is 2022, we're coming out of COVID. Are we going to do the reverse? That is, Chinese who encounter America and go back. Because his books was the Americans in China who returned to China, right? And he's, no, I don't have time. I'm not going to write another book. I said, oh. Then the next day he said, I like the idea. And so what I proposed, because I had done edited volumes as well as lots of other kinds of writing, was something of these commissioned essays that we would decide, the two of us, on a number of persons, maybe 18. And the strategy we used, one strategy was to ask friends from China, name 5 people who have had an impact in China who Americans don't know. I didn't realize it was going to be who Chinese didn't know either, but that was the focus. And so we generated names, and then we brainstormed, and we thought, okay, deadline, we would only have people who were published authors, had met deadlines, and because I've done quite a few of these, I am a taskmaster. Terry is too. He's a perfectionist. It was fantastic working with him, but I write to deadline. I get other people to write the deadline, and that was the deal. And we had enough. But then we chose people who really cared about their subject. And this is a format that none of these, they're all academics. And this is a format they had not used before. So it was very liberating in a way for them, right? I think it's 20,000 words. Here's the deadline. We did a template. Every chapter had to cover certain things. So you have a template to write to, and then you had the deadline. I needed the first draft this time, then it would be edited, then it's back to you. And if it didn't get it returned, it was going to go out. Would go to the next stage without your approval. So it was fantastic. I don't think there was only one person we had to hound. And it was because it was a new format. The template was very clear, and it was a story they wanted to tell. They really cared about their people. And that makes a huge difference. And it wasn't academic, so it wasn't about testing a theory or citing the literature or, filling it. No, this was this freedom to write about a person that they cared about.
Thank you. I'm sorry, there was a second question.
We can talk about it, but the gender piece, yes, we talked about this at lunch. So we did not deliberately it's 7, it's 6, 7 and 5. So there's a slight majority of women. It partly is the fields. That is, we didn't do business and we didn't do the Xiaomi level, although Marjorie certainly is a global leader in her field. But we weren't going for those big names of the new Chinese firms, and we weren't going to take on any political leaders. There were people who wanted us to write about, you can imagine who they wanted us to write about, and we just said, no, this book is not going to profile any Chinese political leader. That was off. And those are subjects, both business and politics, where males would be more likely to be found. If we're going to choose dance, in music, it was a man. But the other fields, these are arenas where actually women occupationally have had leadership and played a role. Xie Xide is extraordinary. But one of the factoids I found out when I was looking at Chinese students who were in the United States in 1948-49, there was the highest number of women in this cohort that had been there forever. So there was a group of educated women studying in America way out of proportion to what they're coming from other countries. So there are channels. If we go back to the earlier group, if you came from a highly educated family, the expectation was you would continue your education, and that was held for not as strongly. But if you look at women scientists who were trained in the 40s and the 50s, the percentage is much higher than it is even to today. It declines steadily after that period.
Thank you.
I don't think I need a microphone, right?
Oh, want this?
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Ariana, and I'm an undergrad from Beijing Foreign Studies University. I major in area study. Building on what Ms. Huang just said, I just first want to say that I'm really grateful for this book to be published, because I feel like, especially for younger generations, we have rare chance to get to know like this specific and stories from the past. So basically my question is that I feel like the courses that I took in my school now, they're very theoretical. We try to explain like all international affairs in a very like established and systematic framework, but I feel like reality is sometimes very different from that. So, and also Professor Davis just mentioned that this book is not really that academic or theoretical. We follow more flexible template. So I feel like sometimes I question like ordinary student like me. I don't go to Yale. I know probably never will. So
But you go to
Beijing
Foreign Language.
Thank you. I'm just kind of like questioning the point in like ordinary students studying international relationships, because I feel like there's no big difference that I can make in this. And what are, I mean, all three of you have many experience in both countries, so just want to get a little bit insight in what other ways except like textbook can we get to know like vivid, I don't know, U.S. China like things and relationships and different aspects, just other than theories.
Let me just quickly say, but then let the two extraordinary women who have gone, which is one of the things that the case study profile like is life is unpredictable.
Yeah.
In reading these stories, so that it's not a straight line, and you watch. We know, in fact, that many of these subjects, including Wang Jise, thought it was over. They were 25 years old, they were sent down, or they were locked up. It was over. They could not imagine what was to come. So one of the main things in these vignettes, you never know where it's going to end up. So both of you should comment.
I think your question is why should you study international relations?
Wow. Well, partially, yes.
So, well, I think probably now more than ever, because geopolitics is everything. I mean, Look at the group of people that was profiled in this book, right? So I now live in China. I have my view of the world have been changing and changing. You saw Marjorie Young, who was born in Hong Kong. She's probably the only, she went to MIT, she sat on the board of MIT, and her company and the shirts that she makes are banned in the US for national security reasons.
The chapter has it at the end, the Xinjiang section.
Yeah, because of Xinjiang cotton. And so this is how weird it is. And this is how international politics, probably very unexpected to Margie, would interfere into her life and her work.
Yeah, she would have thought that.
And it turns people's lives and careers and enterprises upside down. So that's why you should study. So if that happens to you, you're not so surprised.
Oh, thank you.
So is your question how someone young like you could have an impact?
Yeah.
How you can have an impact?
Oh, I wish.
You will.
You will. First of all, be confident that you will. Second of all, find the thing that you're passionate about and pursue that thing above all else. And if it is international relations, yay, do it. If it's not, drop it and do something else. Don't be afraid.
I love ping pong, so the first sight I was on the cover of this book, I was like, I'm gonna read it.
Great.
Thank you, thank you.
And I hope everyone will read it.
Oh.
too. I think if you're interested in this talk, it'll be good for you. Maybe one last question, huh?
While we're getting the question, get the microphone out. Yeah, I just wanted to say I do have the flyer. I think you can get the ebook, and there's a discount. So if we've had to bring the book and to buy the book physically is very difficult in China. Most have to be brought in. But I think the ebook, which you'll see on the flyer, I think as long as you have an American credit card, you can, and you'll get the discount. You just put the discount code in.
Good evening, I'm Ivy, and I engage in international education and also a newly admitted students of UPenn this year. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Somehow I like this book so much because it is somehow like a callback. I'm also a translator of a book called Asian American History and Culture and Encyclopedia. Yeah, I'm the translator. It's about 10 years ago. Yeah, so it just tells the first generation of the Asian peoples go to America, something like that. And this book is something like callback in the 10 years. Based on the experience, I just have two questions. One is that because I am engaged in international education, and now so many Chinese students and parents just considering about the political change of the China and American. They are kind of hesitated to go to American. Yeah, so how do you think that maybe we can encourage or build their confidence and to seek this? Yeah, I really think American education, especially for undergraduate period, is very good. And the second question is, I also admitted by the UPenn, but still hesitated to go or not because I have graduated for 10 years and in my 30s, because in China, and actually I do wish I could live like in China is, when I'm in my maybe 60s or something like that. So I just want to listen about it.
That's a very short answer to a very complicated question. Of course, the enrollment of students from overseas has gone down and has a lot to do with our current administration's policies. It has not, I don't think it reflects the change, the basic change within the university. I can only talk about my university, but I perceive that. So I think students coming from outside the U.S. Still have a good experience, a very good experience. But the current policies from our central government are making it very difficult. And then other conditions in our country, whether it's too dangerous, whatever is the concern, these are real concerns. And I can just say that individually, universities are definitely thinking about it and responding, as well as trying to have a new administration, which might take us back to the rules that we had a few years ago. But the other piece is that the number of small initiatives, it doesn't have to be 4 years going for a degree. And I think here we have initiative from both sides, that the Chinese university and schools can take initiatives, and on the American, we're just making it bilateral, not there, we can talk about other countries. So I'm just talking about these two. And that's what I can exactly give you examples of the trips that we have done with Yale students in the last 3 months and the workshops that we're doing in the summer. In some ways, it is a throwback to where we were when I started this business in the 80s. So I have confidence, but I think they are terrific. So I think that there are many ways in international education, short of being a formal 4-year degree program. And I think that might be a good thing. We're going to experiment with all kinds of things. And the second piece is this digital, not the AI piece. I did not want to talk about AI tonight, but there is so much that we can do without physically traveling to the other country. And this is transformative. So, and now we're much more skilled, thanks to COVID, to doing this kind of, whether it started, I remember when we were developing the Singapore program, we'd have the meetings at, 12-hour difference, and the screen would have the table extend through the screen. So it was as if we were all sitting around a table. And this is old, this is pre-COVID. Then when we got to Singapore and we're sitting around the table, we actually were already comfortable with sitting around the table. And I just think there are these types of digital things that we can use, not as a substitute, but as part of our strategies so that we can partner and be peer projects. And that extends to international education. So thank you all very much. And I'll leave the flyers up in front.